BlackRock, one of the companies that might be running the world, now gets a letter from Congress saying that they might be being investigated for antitrust violations. They basically own everything. With them, Vanguard and another company, they make up the big three. They own huge portions of the stock market, have a major voice, and we've seen consequences of their influence in things like equity, diversity, inclusion, and climate change, in different policies that we're seeing different corporations around the world adopt. And now Congress is asking questions about it, because this has been something that the billionaire class, the people who really, run the financial systems and the capital of the world, have been pushing for a long time. We've got Bill Gates been talking about climate taxes, been a big supporter of BlackRock, and BlackRock is making an interesting pivot. In fact, they're actually now getting a little bit bullish on Bitcoin, which is a very curious thing after they complained about it and depressed crypto and waged their regulatory war. Maybe they're now changing gears. So we've got a curious letter that came out from Congress, from the Oversight Committee, that really details the power that BlackRock has. You can see it comes from the Committee on the Judiciary, and you can see this one went over to Larry Fink. He's the chairman of BlackRock. And it says, "Dear Mr. Fink, the Committee on the Judiciary is conducting oversight on the adequacy and the enforcement of United States antitrust laws. Says we write because BlackRock, your company, is potentially violating United States antitrust laws by entering into agreements to, quote, decarbonize its assets under management, and they own a lot of assets, and reduce emissions to net zero." Okay, they can fly around on their private planes, own billions of dollars of property, use more energy and resources than the rest of us combined in our lifetimes, and they will tell us to use less. Because this is really, in my opinion, about control. It's about taking power, protecting their planet, and taking what they believe to be the lower class that needs to be treated like little tax cattle and limiting their consumption for their gain. They say that now they're trying to decarbonize its assets under management, potentially with harmful effects on Americans' freedom and our economic well-being. Accordingly, to advance our oversight, we write to ask BlackRock to give us some documents. More about the company. BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager with over $9 trillion of assets under management as of March 2023. Think about the United States GDP. If the GDP of the United States is about $3 trillion a year, that's like 3 United States worth of assets. It's a lot. Under management. As of the end of 2021, BlackRock owns 7.7 shares and casts 9.8% of all the votes in the S&P 500. Okay, about 10% of the votes of the S&P. Together with State Street Corporation and Vanguard, we know these are companies in the similar vein, BlackRock is one of the so-called big three asset managers, and they own a combined 21.9% and a vote of 24.9% of all the shares. A quarter of the voice, boom, to those three companies. 1/4. So if they three collude with each other, and you can imagine they would all have the same interests, which is more consolidation of power, more assets under management. 1/4. They say BlackRock is now a member of both Climate Action 100 Plus and an organization called Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, NZAM. Through Climate Action, BlackRock appears to have reached a collusive agreement with other institutional investors to, quote, work with companies in which they invest to deliver net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. No more greenhouse gas emission. They're so concerned about carbon dioxide. People produce carbon dioxide. Similarly, through NZAM, BlackRock appears to collusively have agreed with other asset managers to, quote, work in partnership with asset owner clients on decarbonization goals, consistent with an ambition to reach net zero emissions by 2050 or sooner across all assets under management. So, in other words, 1/4 of the S&P, which is about what they have, or 1/5, creating 1/4 of the votes, they want all to go this way. And they're coming into agreements to do this. And that's a powerful agreement. These collusive agreements, they say, to decarbonize and to reduce emissions to net zero by 2050 would require draconian declines in the use of coal, oil, gas, as much as 98% for coal, 94% for oil, and 86% for fossil fuels. This would require radical steps, like halting sales of new internal combustion engine cars by 2035 and phasing out all unabated coal and oil plants by 2040. This is about an industrial economic power shift, taking money from old oil money, bringing it into new green money, and using the leverage of the corporate eco-regulation mania to do it. It would mean that no new oil or gas fields must be developed, choking off investment in these industries. Such restrictions limit output and increase prices, deprive businesses of investments and consumers of choices. The potential consequences for American freedom could be far-reaching. They say that collusive agreements harm competition and consumers, and they're illegal under the Sherman Act. Horizontal output restrictions are just per se illegal, but the types of conduct banned are not limited to regulating prices or limiting production. Any coercive activity that prevents its victims from making free choices between market alternatives is inherently destructive of competitive conditions and may be condemned. This holds true in a number of different incidents. The Supreme Court claimed that social justifications that are used to restrain trade cannot redeem anti-competitive collusion. And so, to help us understand BlackRock, your role in entering into agreements to, quote, decarbonize your assets and reduce emissions, please produce for the committee the following. 1. All documents and communications referring to the need for BlackRock to advance decarbonization. What do you need to do this for? All documents about how you developed these targets and your commitments and your conversations with other alliances to get it done. We want all documents and communications relating to how BlackRock and other managers should advance these goals, including what are your policies? What are you going to be sponsoring, supporting, opposing, voting for? What are your initiatives with these organizations? We want all documents about agreements that you've executed with anybody involved in this, and all documents about how the decarbonization affect output, price, and other choices that might impact consumers, investors, especially in these markets like coal, gas, and oil. And so send us this stuff no later than later this month, and you better construe this, our friends, as a preservation letter. Don't you destroy anything, intentionally or negligently. We want all of your electronic information, all of your text messages and phone messages preserved, including anything with encryption software. If you've got any questions about it, let us know. Sincerely, your friend, Jim Jordan. Dan Bishop, Thomas Massey, over from Congress. And so we now have other people who've been on board with this for a long time. Bill Gates was one of them. Gates is talking about his efforts and his support of BlackRock. This is from a clip from October 2022, and this has been something they've been pushing for a very long time.
BlackRock and Larry in particular are a great example of private sector leadership. Anyone who says that climate shouldn't be a factor in how you evaluate the future of a company, that's not capitalism, because companies that have emissions, they are going to be subject to border adjustment tariffs or taxes. You also have to think about companies, if you're dealing with severe weather events, that's got to be factored in. Is the company ensuring that? Are they becoming more resilient? So the attacks are kind of illogical because climate does affect the economy, which does affect investments. The idea that we still need oil and natural gas is also, fairly clear. We're not going to drain all the money away from those sectors. That's how people get to work today. It's how people avoid freezing to death in the winter. And, people did get a little optimistic about how quickly the transition could be done. Now, without the Russian natural gas being available in Europe, it's a setback. We need to find non-Russian hydrocarbon sources to substitute for those. So there's coal plants running and a variety of things because, keeping people warm, keeping those economies in decent shape is a priority. Now, on the other hand, it's good for the long run because people won't want to be dependent on Russian natural gas. So they'll move to these new approaches more.
So these people now are at the stage where they're just moving assets around, right? They have giant investments in huge markets, and different countries are basically different markets. And their global efforts, like the climate change narrative, is something like a marketing campaign. And if you are successful in that campaign, you're going to get more clients for your green energy alternatives to the current way of life. So they have these different efforts underway. And what's so interesting about this is they just pivot. They really don't have much alignment with any real concrete values, most of these people. It's about making money. It's about capitalizing on pandemics and all sorts of things. And they do a very good job of it. That's why they are billionaires, if not trillionaires, with the amount of things they control. But what was so fun about this one is Larry Fink, if you remember, and Bill Gates and all these climate change lunatics, they will come out and they were telling us for years what a disaster Bitcoin was for climate. You remember that? It's using all the energy. Elizabeth Warren was pounding the table, screaming from the rooftops. It's like a whole country, these Bitcoin miners and all the stuff. And they were saying that it could take down the grid, and this was being used by hackers and criminals, and the whole thing should be condemned and criticized. And that was when it was more or less a threat to mass adoption and maybe to their system of their financial structure. And so now we have a very interesting pivot from Larry Fink, who is the leader of BlackRock. Suddenly, after they've got a bunch of regulatory capture, once they've crushed a bunch of the other crypto companies and they're now on the way out, huge swaths of the crypto sector have fled the country, companies starting in other parts of the world. Now suddenly, Bitcoin is no longer a threat to the climate. Now it's no longer a threat to the security. In fact, now BlackRock, as the markets are all suppressed and they can go in and gobble up a bunch of Bitcoin for cheaper than previously, they suddenly think, oh, it might actually be digital gold.
And also, I do believe the role of crypto is digitizing gold in many ways. It's instead of investing in gold as a hedge against inflation, a hedge against the onerous problems of any one country or the devaluation of your currency, whatever country you're in. Let's be clear, Bitcoin is an international asset. Wow. It's not based on any one currency. And so it can represent an asset that people can play as an alternative. I would call the foundation of BlackRock is about hope. You invest for retirement because you believe tomorrow is better than today.
Right, and they are now playing around with Bitcoin. You can see the Chiron. Says, we hope regulators look at the spot ETF filings as a way to democratize crypto. So BlackRock now wants to get their hands into the crypto game after a bunch of people have been scared out of it, after they have shattered a lot of people's faith in it. Now the Judiciary Committee is demanding answers, saying we want to know more about your role in colluding with other asset managers. We'll see if they respond and what Congress has to say.